continuity of intent, continuity of a founder's intent. We're going to explore this topic in depth and understand why wealth disappears and businesses fail after the founder, and how structure can be used to prevent it. As I said earlier, this briefing will be held under the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, the Meru Chambers. It's a pleasure to be doing this under them because they understand the problems that business owners and family enterprises go through. And it's through this realization that we agreed that this discussion would be very, very crucial in the coming days. So, why does wealth fail after the founder? And how can structure be used to prevent that? This is the question that we are going to answer today. So without much further ado, let us proceed. Okay. So, today we shall begin with a very simple reframe. I want us to understand two things that are very crucial for everyone to understand. The silent enemy. You see, most founders and family enterprises understand and are trained on how to fight risk. They understand how to fight market forces, competitors, politics, taxation. Almost none, if ever any, are trained and understand how to manage entropy. And the few that do understand how to manage entropy go on to build legacies that survive generations. And we shall be looking at multiple examples of families who've either succeeded in managing entropy or failed terribly at managing entropy. Let's start by definitions first. Risk is market. Risk is the political atmosphere and temperatures within a given state or organization. Risk is competition and competitors. Risk is the tax incentives, the tax obligation that exists. And risk is generally external. It comes from outside the institution. But entropy is internal decay. There is a law of physics and naturally a law of nature. I don't know how many of us were able to do physics in secondary or tertiary education levels, but there's a law of physics that states that systems naturally have a tendency of moving from order to disorder unless energy is deliberately applied. This happens to all systems. In nature, in business, in family, systems have a tendency to move from order to disorder. And you see, most founders will survive risks. The ones who survive risk will dominate the market. But very few of them understand how to solve entropy, because entropy does not attack loudly. It does not announce itself. Entropy waits and strikes. And most failure of businesses, founder-led ventures, and family enterprises comes from unmanaged entropy. Now, before we proceed, there is another term that I'd like us to understand, and that is continuity. As you can see from today's briefing, we're calling it the continuity briefing. But what is continuity? In the most simplest of terms, continuity is the ability of value to outlive the human who created it. And it's very crucial to have a distinction between success and continuity, because success is creating value, it's making profit, it's dominating market share, it's acquiring assets. But continuity, on the other hand, is something much, much more nuanced than that. Continuity is about keeping value alive. It's about rules and standards of practice. It's about decision making, and crucially, continuity is about transmission of not just value but decision making capability. And we shall look at that in depth as we proceed with this briefing. One key thing I'd like you to understand from this definition and separation of success and continuity is that you can be successful and still have zero continuity. So continuity is not about money. It's about the architecture that holds the money and the value that you create. And this begs the question, can value outlive the founder who created it? And the solution is continuity. But for our founder, a family-led enterprise, to survive continuity, they have to follow and be aligned to what I call the continuity law. What is this continuity law? The continuity law is basically the law that states that three problems need to be solved sequentially and in order so that continuity can be achieved. These are sequential problems and you cannot skip one and go to the other if you indeed want to achieve continuity. The first law is about structure, and the question about structure is, can the value you're creating, whether it's an agrovet, whether it's a service-based industry type of a business, whether it's a product type of a business that you're selling to the general public, can the value that you're creating exist independently of you or independently of a person? That's very key, because the law provides legal containers and special purpose tools that help in separation of the person and the actual value that they're generating. And this is very key because it allows the value to be able to move, to be able to be transitioned, and we shall look into that later. The second problem that must be solved in order to survive continuity is alignment. And the question about alignment is, can humans interact with this value, with this structure, with this special purpose vehicle that you've created without destroying it? This means internally and externally, can people interact with this thing? And finally is transmission. Can this value that you've created, can this structure that you have outlined pass and move across time, across generations? Can it move safely without being destroyed? And now the biggest problem is that most founder-led ventures and family enterprises usually start with transmission without solving alignment, without solving structure. And this can only guarantee collapse. All these sequential problems need to be solved in order. Now, I want to introduce you to the framework that we will be relying on today. The continuity arc. What is the continuity arc? The continuity arc is a life cycle that every enduring business, founder-led venture, a family enterprise must pass through if value is indeed to survive its creator. If continuity is to be achieved, these enterprises must pass through this arc. The very first one is formation. This is the existential phase, the creation phase. The second one is alignment. This is the internal phase. The third is capital, which is the external phase. And finally, and most importantly, is transmission, which is the temporal phase. It is very key to note that if you miss any one of these phases, continuity breaks. And most Kenyan enterprises, and we look at them, never make it past phase 2, which is very, very unfortunate. So this arc demonstrates how these problems and various problems within the life cycle of a family enterprise, of a founder-led enterprise, how these problems appear over time. And we shall dissect each of these phases of the arc one by one. To begin with, we will start with formation. Now, most of us have a very simple understanding of what formation is. Formation is not registration. Formation is separation. It's ontological creation, separating the person from the asset. And why do we do this? You know, the law provides that an individual has the power to create a juristic person, a person who can trade, who can sue and be sued, who can acquire and sell property on their own name. This allows an individual, you now, to create either a company, a private limited company, a trust, any other special purpose vehicle that you can think of. It allows you to move the value and the assets from the individual into this entity that can hold them on your behalf. Why do we do this? There are very many reasons. The first one and the most important one is liability. Personal liability and also commercial liability. If you as an individual gets yourself unfortunately into a kind of unfortunate event where you're required or obligated to pay a certain sum, either through damages, either through payments individually, apart from you and the business. If this situation finds you and you have not separated the entity from yourself, then the value that you're creating is going to be passed to you. For instance, a simple example, you're driving your car, unfortunately you hit a pedestrian, they sue you, you're supposed to pay damages of whatever amount with dependency, maybe 10 million Kenya shillings. That damage that you're supposed to pay will pass on to the value you've created if you have not separated it from your entity. The second thing that might happen is the business incurs losses. The business fails, which no businesses do. And in this instance, you have not separated the entity from yourself, then the liability of the creditors pass directly to you instead of the company. And this is where you go through bankruptcy instead of insolvency. So formation asks the question, does this thing exist without you? And to be able to answer this question, you need to go through 4 dimensions. The first one is identity. Is it a legal person distinct from you? Does it have a KRA PIN? Does it file its own returns? Are there the beneficial owners declared? Very key. The second dimension is ownership clarity. Does the capitalization table of the company match a CR12 once we do as such? Do the share issuance to the various shareholders exist in WhatsApp text alone, or are they clearly documented? it is very key to understand information that if ownership is unclear, control of the entity is just but an illusion. The third dimension to ensure that you've covered is asset separation. Who owns the intellectual property, if any? Who was the intellectual property ever assigned? If they are licenses, are they personal or institutional? The fourth and the final dimension is contractual agency. A formed institution must be the one doing business, not you. So the questions are clients, suppliers, distributors contracting with you as a person or with the entity? Do the suppliers even know the company exists? Who signs contracts? Are there even agreements in the first place between the entity and their contractors? It's very crucial to understand here that if removing you from the institution breaks the institution was never formed in the first place. Now we're going to move into something I call the acid test. We all know of Apple computers, one of the most successful companies in human history. Apple Computers Incorporated was incorporated by Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne in the year 1977. The intellectual property, the contracts, the decision making existed beyond one person, whether it's Steve Jobs or Ronald Wayne. And in 1984, 1985, there was a crucial and fundamental disagreement between Steve Jobs and the board in terms of product direction and customer segmentation. Because of this disagreement, Steve Jobs, organized a coup against the sitting CEO, which failed very terribly. He left Apple rather dramatically. Either he was chased or he was fired. But one key thing to note with this test is that the system did not collapse when Steve Jobs left. The contracts did not dissolve. The intellectual property did not revert to him. The customers, crucially, were not orphaned because the company was not him. And after leaving Apple, Jobs proceeded to build another company. And after 8 years, Apple proceeded to acquire this company and Steve Jobs' assets and intellectual property as a result. And a few decades later, actually a few years ago, Apple became the very first ever company to be valued at $1 trillion. And this is not just because Steve Jobs was brilliant, which he was. It is because the system that he designed, him and his co-founders, outlived him. The system existed without him. It expelled him. It reabsorbed him. And it continued without him. And this is what I call the acid test of formation. If you can be fired from your enterprise, you built a system. If you cannot be fired, you are the system. And crucially, you have not solved formation. Now, let's proceed to phase 2 of the continuity arc, which is alignment or internal peace. The core question around alignment is, will insiders destroy the thing from inside out? This is where crucially most Kenyan businesses and enterprises fail, and I will show you exactly how. Businesses that survive the market, the formation, market dominance, rarely, if ever solve alignment. Alignment in these terms doesn't mean that people agree on everything. Alignment basically means that disagreements are contained and organized in how they can be solved, because it's human nature to have disagreements. So during alignment, a founder or a family-led enterprise needs to answer very crucial questions. Who decides? Who benefits? Who controls the institution of the enterprise? Who exits and how do they exit? Now, relationships, you have to understand, always fracture under pressure, especially when you do not have governance. Markets do not kill businesses. Misaligned insiders do. And this case study will show us exactly what I mean by this. In the late 1980s and 1990s, a gentleman by the name Joram Kamau founded a very successful business that he called Gitwe General Stores. In 1990, he transmitted his assets under Gitwe General Stores to his nephews, David Kimani and Simon Mukuha. Now, Gitwe General Stores was no small enterprise. It had large stores in Nakuru, in Rongai, in Nairobi, in Naivasha. And after his demise, the cousins created two diverse companies in the same industry that teach us very crucial lessons. David Kimani proceeded to found Tuskys, while his cousin Simon founded Naivas. Now, when David transitioned, he left Tuskys under the care of his beneficiaries, his children. He left the assets, but he left no governance tools for alignment. There was no shareholder agreement. There was no family constitution. There were blood boundaries between family and business operations. And sibling rivalry exploded in 2012, where there was allegation of 1.6 billion Kenya shillings in theft, physical fights between siblings in boardrooms, and this became one of the downturns of Kenya's most promising businesses. There was public litigation, and courts became the de facto governance framework that was never left. Because of their failure in alignment, phase 2, the company never made it to phase 3. And as a result, it was liquidated in 2023. You see, in Tuskys' case, the conflict was never managed. It was allowed to spill into the enterprise itself. Now, in contrast, when Simon Mukuha passed away, he left his family with a valid will. This will allowed them to resolve the conflicts without the entity fracturing. Indeed, there was conflict. There was conflict between Kagiri and his siblings, but it was resolved because the will and the structured governance framework provided a legal roadmap. They maintained separation between ownership, management, and daily operations. What Naivas did brilliantly, and most people do not understand, is they brought in professional management, which in turn diluted the value that they had in the family value, but it saved them towards continuity. The system survived through engineered, legal structured, and clear governance frameworks. Today, Naivas is a giant, a powerhouse in Kenyan retail industry. It's valued at around 50 billion Kenya shillings. It has over 80 open stores countrywide. And this shows us that alignment is not just trust, it's not family meetings, it's not goodwill of verbal agreements. Alignment shows that good intentions do not survive the pressures of the market, but good structure does. Let us move to phase 3. Phase 3 of the continuity arc is capital, and capital has to do with external stresses. The quick question around capital is, can outsiders interact with this thing without breaking it? Now you see, capital is not fuel for running an enterprise. Capital is a stress tester. Capital is an audit. Capital tests everything that comes before it all at once. Structure. Is ownership clear and enforceable? Do the insiders act predictably even when they're under pressure? Is there alignment? Do books, filing, and contracts agree with the formation and the alignment? Can decisions be made clearly and quickly? This is what capital audits. Now you see, capital touches every weak point in the system. And if capital enters before alignment, if capital enters before formation, the money will just amplify the conflict. And that's why you find most founder-led ventures and family enterprises die immediately after founding. When capital arrives, the questions multiply. Who owns what? Who guarantees? Who can sign? Who exits and how do they exit? Who approves? If these questions were informal, capital withdraws, and very, very quickly. And I shall demonstrate this with another Kenyan giant that failed, the Nakumatt saga. Now, you see, Nakumatt was incorporated. It passed the formation stage. Nakumatt, well, alignment existed, but was quite fragile because of the founder-led control of the structures and control. What capital did when it came into Nakumatt, it revealed the internal decay, the entropy within the system. The key misconception that Nakumatt fell for was because suppliers keep on giving us credit, our structure, our alignment must be very strong. They failed to note that supplier credit is capital, and capital always audits. They found themselves with creditor debt of up to 38 billion Kenya shillings in supplier credit. When the creditors asked for clarity, they had no answers, the questions were raised, and the trust evaporated. One supplier withdrew, and then suddenly all withdrew, and capital left very suddenly, as I mentioned. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very crucial that we understand that there is a difference between confidence and structure. Nakumatt did not collapse because they lacked money. Indeed, they collapsed because money arrived without structure, without governance frameworks. So, capital did not create the problem per se, it actually revealed it. So, in this phase, it's crucial to understand that if structure is informal, if alignment is unresolved, and then capital arrives, then collapse is inevitable. There is another case study of WeWork, an American startup which was supposed to handle co-working spaces in America. But once they hit the initial public offering, the audit of capital forced the company to die very swiftly. So, phase 3 capital is not about bad business model, it's about the inability for an enterprise to survive scrutiny when it arrives. Now, on to phase 4. Phase 4 is a very interesting place to explore because you see, transmission is a very uncomfortable discussion to have. And transmission asks, what happens when you're gone? The key question here is, can value move across time without being destroyed? Now, transmission is not just about assets, and passing of assets. It's about passing of decision-making authority. And people avoid this phase because it raises and it forces very uncomfortable realities. Mortality, that you will not always be there, the loss of control, the exposure of your intent. You see, one thing I would want us to realize very crucially is that the law is very unforgiving when it comes to transmission. And avoidance of this topic does not stop transmission from happening. It just makes it the default. And what do I mean when I say it transitions to the default system? Well, default basically means probate delay. You cannot legally, interfere with the property of an individual because those assets have not passed, they have not been allowed to be accessed. So accounts are frozen. It goes to the point of even school fees. You cannot pay school fees until probate is solved. You cannot, there are structures around it, but it takes the court's goodwill. The default system requires court-supervised distribution. The court decides who gets what. It leads to asset fragmentation. If it was a 10-acre land and there were 20 beneficiaries, the land is fragmented. It can lead to forced sales of value. And very sadly, we can see it lead to sibling deadlock. One crucial thing I want us to understand under phase 4 is courts do not preserve intent. They only divide assets. And you have to understand now, this is where we get into trust law and family trusts. You have to understand that ownership is not control, control is not benefit. What I basically mean by that is you can own without control, you can benefit without decision making, and someone can control without ownership. And the beauty of trust law now is that it aligns with continuity very well, because continuity depends on keeping the roles of ownership, control, and benefit deliberate and separate. And trust law allows you to do this very strategically. This is the family constitution that I was talking about earlier. So, most families try to solve transmission through a will. And indeed, a will transfer assets. But crucially, a will not be able to transfer governance. It will not be able to transfer intention. What are your intentions for coming generations? A will not be able to do that. So in conclusion, transmission only works if there is structure, if there is alignment, and if ever capital entered, it was solved. And I would want us to understand this, that whether you like it or not, every system transmits something. The only question is, does it transmit value or does it transmit conflict? Now, for a case study on phase 4, I would like us to look at two families who two different families. The Mbui Koinange family and the Ambani family in India. Again, I emphasize, transmission is not about who inherits what assets. It's about who decides and under what rules. Let's start with Mbui Koinange. Mbui Koinange is one of the most popular, well-known cabinet secretaries during the Jomo Kenyatta era. He acquired a lot of assets during his lifetime, and unfortunately he passed on September 3rd, 1981, and he died intestate, that is to say, without a will. Now, Mbui Koinange had 4 wives and a total of 12 beneficiaries. He left a vast estate that was, at the time in 1981, valued between 14 to 30 million Kenya shillings. This included 640 acres in Runda, 4,292 farmland in Mau Nakuru, 465 acre farm in Kiambu, 198 acres in Limuru, buildings in Nairobi, Mombasa, Nakuru, and businesses, investments in big corporations within the Kenyan industry. He left all these assets, but unfortunately, he did not leave a governance framework for them. Now, assets passed without the rules. Probate became the governance framework that did not exist because courts replaced the intent and time replaced the leadership. The story and the jurisprudence of the Koinange family lasted a whopping 4 decades, 40 years in court. More than 20 judges were, sat through this matter. And the Honorable Chief Justice Martha Koome, while she was in the High Court, was quoted to have said that this matter is the theater of the absurd. The story of the Mbui Koinange family tells us that when governance is absent, then probate becomes the governance. And I must emphasize once again that avoidance of transmission does not solve transmission. It just makes it the default option, as it happened in the Koinange family. Now, to the other side of the world, the Dhirubhai Ambani, a son of a school teacher, grew his empire from absolutely nothing. He built multiple industries and businesses, but the key one was Reliance Industries Limited, which was India's largest private sector enterprise at the time. Mr. Ambani passed away in the year 2002, again without a will. His sons, the brothers Mukesh Ambani and Anil Ambani, clashed immediately. They had disagreements about, direction, about governance, about market, about everything. This disagreement caused the Indian government to intervene as a matter of national importance because their feud was getting public and it was getting messy, and this could have led to the collapse of the entire Indian stock exchange. How the Ambani were able to self-correct was through a deal that was brokered by their mother. She was able to broker a $23 billion separation, where Mukesh took the old industries and Anil took the newer ones. It is crucial to note that one of the brothers' industries fell into debt and required the other brother to actually, save them by paying the creditors so that he cannot be sent to jail. While the other brother, who is Mukesh, was able to scale the enterprise into a global powerhouse. In this instant, unity was lost, but certainty was preserved. And it's very key to note from these two stories that it's not about who inherits. It's not about it's not about who inherits and what they inherit. It's about who decides and under what rules. That is very key to understand. Now, let's go to the main topic of today. The third generation myth. Having explored the continuity arc, the continuity laws, we can be able to clearly and articulately explain why wealth never reaches or rather dissipates at the third generation. As you can see from the illustration in your screen, the founder in generation 1 creates the value. They solve formation, they solve alignment, maybe not. Generation 2 inherits the assets, they inherit the power, but alignment is never solved. So relationships fracture due to the lack of governance. And by the time you get to generation 3, which is the cousins, they receive fragments of the value that was created by the first generation. There is no structure, there is no shared purpose, and it leads to liquidation. So why does wealth die? And I think we have a definitive answer now. The problem with this third generation myth is that it was never character, it was never discipline. It was missing phases of the continuity arc. Assets and value were passed down, but governance was not. Now, in the registration of this briefing, there was a lot of questions around trust and trust law. And I want to make this clearly. Do you need a company or do you need a trust? The simple answer is you need both, but for different purposes. There are special purpose tools that do specific things. A company is for value creation, while a trust is for value preservation. The function of a company is risk-taking, speed, and market growth, while a trust's function is to avoid entropy at all costs, ensure safety of value, and define governance frameworks for the value that has been generated. So, do you need a company or a trust? That depends on what phase you're in this continuity arc. But you do not start with a trust because you're rich, no. You start with a trust because value is fragile. And because of the very many questions I got around trust law and instituting family trust law, I think the next engagement will be purely tied around trust, incorporation of a trust, the tax benefits of trusts, the governance frameworks that trusts create, and everything encompassing how continuity is and can be achieved through a trust as the core special purpose tool and framework. So, as we conclude today's briefing, it is crucial that we identify in your current enterprise, be it a founder-led venture or a family enterprise, where are you? The beauty of this continuity arc, it allows you to self-diagnose, understand where you are, where you're coming from, and what problems and risks you're likely to, meet on the journey towards continuity. So are you stuck information? Is everything in your head, the agreements, the processes, the workflows, or are you avoiding alignment? Do you fear the difficult conversations? Are you relying solely on goodwill instead of rules? And this is not just within, the potential successors. It's with your distributors, it's with your customers, it's with the people you actually need to, perform what is required of your business or your enterprise. That, are you failing at capital? So, are you uninvestable because of the potential internal chaos that prevents external growth? Or are you ignoring transmission? So, in this case, you'd be betting against your own mortality, and your legacy is legally fragile. So, the key thing to understand here is you do not solve all four at once. You solve the one that is right next to you, that is right about to break. So, in conclusion, the continuity question. Continuity is not about avoiding risk. Risk is inevitable. It's about deciding when risk is allowed to appear. I want you to leave with this simple question. If you left your enterprise today, who would decide, under what rules, and for how long? If you leave this briefing with one lesson and one lesson alone, is you need to build the structure before entropy ever takes over. And with that, I will conclude the discussion there. I believe the briefing has come out clearly. I know there might be questions that are arising. I'm seeing some in the group. But I want to make this very clear before I invite questions. If anything today raises questions about your own assets or your business, that's a very good sign, because it shows you that there's a direction to be taken, and that probably means that you need tailored advice. Tailored advice can only happen in a private engagement, not a public forum like this. So feel free to reach out to me. I am sending the link to the group in the chat. I would like us to join the group. I'll be sharing very interesting nuggets and additional information that you may require, including the following briefing where we'll talk about trust, as I've mentioned. Let me type to the chat. Please start thinking about questions that you may have so that we can move to the question phase. Okay, I'm sending a link to the chat. You can, if you have not yet joined the group, address is robinmutiga@gmail.com. My phone number is 0799 157 696. Okay. If any questions arise, feel free to raise your hand and ask. Simply, yeah. I've sent the link to the WhatsApp group in the chat. Okay, Mutuma Moriuki asks on the chat, so can parents start a trust? The children start their own trust tied to theirs, then trickle down to the next generation? Interesting question. Yes, this is possible. Um, this is absolutely possible, and yes, this can be done. And actually, it's a very interesting way to look at it, because a trust allows you to create an entity whereby you're able to transfer assets to a, let's call it a safe box, where you can share the value. And maybe as a parent, you become the settler of the trust, and you can have your children as beneficiaries to whatever value that you've created. And as a child, of course, you eventually become a parent if you intend to. Then you can also use the trust for your own value, for your own assets, and allow them to move across generations. So this is completely possible as well. Brian Onjoy asks, where is the WhatsApp group? Please just, I'm sending it again. Okay. Any other questions? I don't want to leave anyone out. Patrick, are you here? Patrick? Okay. Nelson, can you say something maybe on behalf of the chamber as you conclude? On behalf of the chamber?
However, all of you are invited to also join as members of the chamber. These sessions will continue. As you've seen, we shall have many other sessions, not just on law basis, but just business-wise, and we shall all be able to enjoy the benefits of being a chamber. Thank you so much. I have also seen that there has been a question that has been raised. Thank you so much, Robin. Yes.
Hello. Yes, and maybe seek advice. And I would want to congratulate you and the Chamber of Commerce for this very informative presentation. God bless you. I'm Lewis Mwirigi.
Thank you, Lewis. Meshak Ayanga. Meshak, your hand is raised. Your microphone is muted. Meshak?
Oh yeah, sorry. I've asked my question. It's in the chat. But anyway, it was a very informative session. I really appreciate. I've learned a lot. Personally, there are a few things that I'm going to apply in our business. So my question is in the chats, kindly.
Okay. In a startup setup with a multi-generation mission and vision, what are the necessary steps and advice you might give? So the beauty about this briefing, it's not just about family enterprises, it's also about founder-led ventures. It's about startups as well. You see, in the continent, over the last 2 or 3, 5 years, Kenya has received the most amount of venture capital towards startups in agriculture, in financial technology, and in many other areas of startup law. But we have seen there is a consistent failure of huge startups that end up, dissipating. We have seen Twiga Foods, we have seen many come and go. I think the necessary steps that I would share and I would ensure that are in place before we go into the capital phase of a startup is, first of all, incorporation. Incorporation is very key, that is formation. And we said incorporation is not just, the certificate of incorporation. It's about returns. It's about, have you filed your beneficial owners report? Have you, registered the company with the Kenya Revenue Authority as well as other regulators within your space? And secondly, in most startup, there is always maybe 2 or 3 co-founders. One brings marketing, one brings market acumen, one brings experience, and so on and so forth. Is there an agreement, an understanding of how you operate? For instance, if one is a developer, have you been able to move the code that you have written into the name of the company? If, for instance, you built an agricultural product, maybe a tool to do a specific thing, is the intellectual property of that product with you, the founder, or with one of the co-founders, or is it registered under the firm? And this is crucial because you find in most instances when co-founders get to a point they disagree, and they may disagree on direction, they may disagree on very many things. And in those instances, you find when one of the founder leaves, they leave with maybe the intellectual property, they leave with even shares. If you already had a shareholder agreements that stated that I own 50%, they leave with 50%. So it's very crucial that you have governance frameworks around that. It's crucial that you have a clear understanding of, if somebody does not fulfill their end of the bargain, what happens? Do the ownership they have into the company still vest into them? That's where we have under shareholder agreements something called vesting schedules, which say you have to work for 5 years so that you can earn your 50%. You have to work for this, you have to achieve this goal so that you can achieve this ownership that you need. Another thing is the founder leaves through a disagreement. They take you to an employment and labor relations court. How do you handle that? So alignment is very crucial. As I've said, most founders are able to solve formation, but rarely ever able to solve alignment. And without alignment, there is no capital, or if capital comes before alignment, then it's collapse. So it's very key to understand that this continuity arc works for both startups, for founder-led ventures, for family enterprises. This is the same framework that you're using, whether you're a startup founder or you are a family-led enterprise. I think that is clearly answered, Meshach.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think more questions. I think we can organize another meeting,
Okay.
a private meeting, so that maybe you could ask more. But anyway, thank you. We've learned a lot. Looking forward to more of this.
Thank you, Meshach. Thank you, Meshach. Mutuma, as you conclude, that's the last one.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Robin. First of all, backstory with Robin is that I was looking for a lawyer who understood trusts and family trusts, but I realized that even the whole narrative of trust is very nascent in Kenya. It was just amended in 2024, and of course it will be easier for the younger lawyers to understand what this means. And Robin is the right person to work with, especially in this space, because he understands this very well. So I want to thank you, and also because some of my other friends that I invited have been on the call. I hope they have also learned, and I believe we can meet physically, because this was just the initial conversation. Maybe in this Q1, maybe February or March, then we can continue, ironing out with better case examples, and with more specific goals in mind for everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mutuma. Let me finally conclude by saying this was a pilot briefing. As Nelson from the chamber noted, that we shall have additional briefings. If you have not yet joined the group, the link is in the chat. Kindly join. I shall be sharing a lot of information there, updates on the laws, strategies that you can use to ensure continuity, and among many, many other things. I just want to appreciate each and every one of you for joining and participating this very early morning on a Saturday. I really, really do appreciate you. I really do appreciate you. So if you'd want much, much more in-depth understanding of where you specifically are, we can map that out together. My practice focuses on continuity, designing continuity for founders and family-led ventures. So feel free to reach out. My email is in the chats again, robinmutiga@gmail.com. My phone number is 0799157696. You can also just be able to text me on WhatsApp through the group if you've already joined. And with that, thank you so much, and have a blessed Saturday, everyone. Until next time, this has been the Continuity Briefing. Thank you.